For over a decade, Pep Guardiola has been football's ultimate innovator. The architect who built dynasties by constantly evolving his tactical approach. But the man who once revolutionized football with juego de posición is now facing his worst crisis in over 15 years of management. The mastermind behind Manchester City's historic 4 consecutive Premier League titles now sits 20 points behind Liverpool, out of the Champions League, and on one of the worst runs of his career. So what happens when the chess master runs out of moves? Pep Guardiola has always been defined by one constant: change. His teams have dominated through obsessive evolution of positional play, a philosophy based on controlling space, dictating tempo, and suffocating opponents with possession. Throughout his career, Guardiola has constantly tweaked his tactical approach. He transformed his defensive midfield from single to dynamic double pivots. His fullbacks evolved from overlapping attackers to inverted playmakers. His wingers shifted from inverted goal scorers to positional width holders. And his strikers developed from false nines to pure goal-scoring machines. To understand Guardiola's current crisis, we must first understand his foundational philosophy. At Barcelona, Guardiola transformed football with what would become known as tiki-taka, though he himself despised that term. It wasn't just about possession, it was about positional superiority. The pitch was divided into zones with specific principles. He demanded never more than 3 players in a horizontal line and never more than 2 players in a vertical line. His system created triangles everywhere for passing options and positioned players between opposition lines. This wasn't just about entertaining, it was ruthlessly effective. Barcelona's dominance was built on suffocating pressure and precision passing that exhausted opponents mentally and physically. When Guardiola arrived in Germany, he faced his first major challenge, adapting his approach to a different footballing culture. At Bayern, he began experimenting with more direct play, utilizing the width of the pitch more aggressively. His fullbacks became more versatile, and his wingers stretched defenses in ways Barcelona hadn't. This was the first evidence of Guardiola's willingness to evolve beyond his comfort zone. He adapted to the players rather than forcing them to adapt to his system. But it was at Manchester City where his tactical innovation would reach its peak. At City, Guardiola had both the financial backing and the time to build his perfect football machine. His first season was challenging, but what followed was unprecedented. The 100-point season of 2017-18 represented the pinnacle of controlled domination in English football, although I'm sure that the Invincibles and Arsenal have something to say about that. But even then, Guardiola wasn't satisfied. Each season brought new innovations. The false fullback role perfected by Kyle Walker and João Cancelo. The dual number 8 positions filled by David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne. The inverted winger system that maximized Raheem Sterling and Riyad Mahrez. And finally, the ultimate adaptation, integrating Erling Haaland and a traditional number 9 into his possession-based system. This was what made Guardiola unique. He managed to marry possession football with direct threat in a way no other manager had before. But something fundamental has broken this season. City's problems start with one devastating absence: Rodri. The Ballon d'Or winner's ACL injury has exposed structural issues throughout the team. Without Rodri, City cannot rest with the ball. Guardiola's crucial principle for maintaining tactical shape and preventing counterattacks. This has created a cascade of problems. City's pressing intensity has plummeted. Opponents are launching 100% more fast breaks against them. They're conceding 57% more goals per game. Critical defensive errors have increased by 41%. After their Champions League exit, Guardiola admitted the system doesn't work like it used to. City's defensive fragility has been particularly alarming. A team that once conceded just 23 goals in an entire league season is now being carved open regularly. The statistics tell a damning story. What's most concerning is how teams are scoring against City. Their defensive transitions have broken down completely. They're being caught with too many players ahead of the ball. And without Rodri, there's no safety net. Even Ederson, once the perfect sweeper keeper for Guardiola's system, seems to have lost confidence, making uncharacteristic errors. After 4 consecutive Premier League titles and finally conquering Europe, a psychological factor cannot be ignored. Even the most elite athletes struggle with maintaining hunger after reaching the summit. There's a natural psychological letdown, but the burden of being the hunted rather than the hunter weighs heavily. Every team raises their game against the champions, and maintaining that mental edge becomes increasingly difficult. Winning is hard. Continuing to win is even harder. And this is where my sympathy for City starts to wane. When clubs with unlimited resources start struggling, it creates space for clubs with genuine passion and commitment to shine. After 9 years at City, more than twice as long as any previous stop in his career, another factor might be at play. 6 of City's core players are over 30 years old, and most have been with Guardiola since his second season. That's over 440 games, thousands of practices, and countless team talks. The European coaching average is just 402 days. Guardiola has been at City for over 3,000. It's not that the message changes. It's that the reception to the message diminishes over time. Pep's intensity is legendary. He's always there, always demanding more. Has that intensity finally reached a breaking point? Now, I say this with reluctance just because of how much money they've spent this January transfer window. But to be fair to everybody on Twitter, City hasn't spent as much as other clubs. The club's net spend has decreased significantly in recent windows, other than January, forcing Guardiola to rely on academy players and aging stars rather than bringing in ready-made solutions. This has coincided with key departures. Cole Palmer sold to Chelsea, becoming a superstar. Well, not so much this year. Julian Alvarez departing for Atletico Madrid. City's recruitment model has shifted from proactive to reactive out of necessity. And for fans who've watched these financial giants buy their way out of trouble for years, there's certain poetic justice to that, for sure. But Guardiola may already be rebuilding for the future. New signings, Nico Gonzalez and Omar Marmoush, represent a tactical pivot. Gonzalez, whom Guardiola calls a mini Rodri, brings back control in the midfield. Meanwhile, Marmoush adds something entirely different. Disorder and direct running that complements Haaland. In the 4-0 victory over Newcastle, we saw glimpses of this evolution. 39 completed long passes, a new emphasis on runners getting behind defense. This represents both a return to foundational principles and an adaptation to football's changing landscape. Guardiola now faces a fundamental tactical choice. Double down on positional play, emphasizing even more control. Embrace the counter-revolution, incorporating more direct play, or find a new synthesis between control and chaos. The third option is most likely. Guardiola has always been about evolution rather than revolution. He'll likely maintain his core principles while adapting to the game's changing dynamics. Guardiola is constantly questioning his own methods. He's probably already found solutions we haven't even thought of yet. The greatest managers in history have always adapted when challenged. Now, Guardiola faces his defining test. Can he evolve his philosophy once more? Can he balance the control that defined his career with the direct football now dominating Europe? Or will this be the season that marks the end of an era? For a coach whose career has been defined by constant evolution, this might be his most important adaptation yet. The chessmaster may be down, but he's far from out of moves. I have to admit, I have to feel a bit of sympathy for Pep. The man has given everything to this game, and watching even the greatest minds struggle reminds us that football is beautifully unpredictable. But I cannot deny there's something refreshing about seeing clubs with a fraction of City's resources find ways to compete. It's why we fell in love with football in the first place, right? Before I wrap up, I do want to thank every single one of you who's helped Buck FC grow so much these past few months. The comments, the shares, the discussions, you're building something special here. I also want to give a little shout out to my Uncle John who pushed me to make this video on this concept. Thank you, John. If you've enjoyed this analysis, make sure to join our growing herd by hitting that subscribe button and becoming one of these young bucks. We're just getting started, and I promise we're going to keep on going.